For 27 long years, Paris haunted Burkina Faso. Every call, every message, every signal had to pass through foreign hands. A French company seated far from the Sahel decided when a mother could call her son, when a doctor could reach a nurse, when a voice could be heard or silenced. That silence was not just technical, it was historical. Until one August morning, when the captain of Burkina Faso, Ibrahim Traoré, did what no president, CEO, or diplomat had ever dared to do. Traoré didn't waste time debating. He acted decisive public. He pulled Europe's plug and switched on a sovereign network for 22 million people and declared the end of digital colonialism. No IMF, no Silicon Valley, no backroom deals, only satellites built in coup fiber cables laid by Burkinabè hands and firewalls coded in Murray. They said Africa would never control its own signal. They said Burkina Faso, landlocked, sanctioned, scarred by war, could never lead a revolution like this. Now, Traoré's action was like a punch, direct, forceful landing squarely on the faces of those who had been living off the lifeblood of this nation, proving them wrong right there. Live. No vote. No permission. Just a quiet, irreversible action and a storm louder than any coup. With one act, 22 million people reclaimed their voice. In that moment, they no longer saw a president. They saw a brother, a son of a land bled time and again, yet still standing. A man like them sharing the same dreams, the same wounds, the same longing to break free from a life of hardship. What does it mean when a nation no longer needs foreign satellites to speak across its own land? Stay with us, because this story is more than history in the making. Subscribe and raise your voice for an Africa that stands tall, not silent. Drop your city. Share it loud. Let them know we will not be quiet. May God bless Africa. For nearly 3 decades, the heartbeat of communication in Burkina Faso didn't pulse in Ouagadougou. It pulsed in Paris. Every call, every message, every scrap of data crossed the ocean before it could reach a neighbor just down the street. And for 27 years, one giant French telecom company, Telréak, held the keys. Their profits dwarfed the nation's entire health budget. Their servers stored the voices of an entire people. And decisions made in conference rooms far from the Sahel could silence an entire province in the blink of an eye. This wasn't just business. It was control. Telréak's profits dwarfed Burkina Faso's national health budget. Their servers held the voices of an entire people. They didn't just carry the signal, they owned the switch. In 2021, when the streets filled with protesters demanding change, that power was used without hesitation. The capital's network was throttled. Remote provinces were cut off completely for 72 hours. Hospitals couldn't order supplies. Families couldn't check on each other. Traders couldn't contact buyers. Teachers couldn't teach. And not a single person in Burkina Faso, not even its ministers, could flip the switch back on. Foreign companies called it system maintenance. But the people knew it for what it was, punishment. Control of the network had become a leash. One tug from abroad, and the entire nation froze. Across Africa, control of the lines has always meant control of the story. This pattern may feel familiar to many of you watching from Detroit, Baltimore, or Chicago. A different language, a different face, but the same story. In the United States, entire black communities have lived decades under media narratives written by others. They tell the story of people of color in their own way, turning voices that fight for justice into threats. They label black leaders as troublemakers, as dangers to regional security. They reduce Africa's pain to cold numbers in official reports. And we know this well: when you don't control the airwaves, you will never control your own story. In Africa, the cables come from foreign corporations. The aid arrives with license fees locked to foreign currencies. Contracts are signed in French or English, not Mure or Dioula, making it impossible for villagers to understand what they are giving away. Even the electromagnetic spectrum, the invisible airwaves that carry our voices, has been auctioned off in deals brokered overseas. Colonialism no longer wears a uniform. It wears a tailored suit. It doesn't carry a whip. It carries legal documents, international contracts, and signed checks. Western news feeds tell the public that Burkina Faso is being supported, given educational aid receiving infrastructure investment. But no one tells you the clean water they lack sits right next to a well that's been privatized for 99 years. No one tells you those pothole-ridden roads were built so trucks could carry gold out of the country, not so children could get to school faster. In a world that preaches human rights and compassion, there's no need to rebuild colonies because every gold mine, every manganese pit, every power line, every fiber cable, even the wells have long been claimed signed away by past presidents' pens. For years, the promise was that foreign expertise would bring progress. In reality, it built a system where the more connected people became, the more dependent they were. And dependence means vulnerability. The same line that can bring opportunity can just as easily bring silence. This country owns the land beneath its feet, but not the cables running underneath. The pattern is all too clear. Outsiders control the signal and set the terms. And those on the inside, the citizens of Burkina Faso, pay the highest price both in money and in freedom. The telecommunications backbone, the infrastructure that shapes education, healthcare, and economic growth, has never truly belonged to them. Ibrahim Traoré understands this better than anyone and has long harbored the determination to help his people. In Burkina Faso, every text message, every email, every phone call paid a price, not just in francs, but in dignity. The line between connectivity and captivity blurred. Foreign experts promised progress, but what they delivered was a mirror of dependence. The more connected we became, the more vulnerable we were to disconnection. The same line that brought opportunity could be cut without warning, and often was. This wasn't negligence, it was design. Because as long as a people rely on outsiders to hear their own voices, they can be silenced at will. And for too long, Burkina Faso lived in that manufactured silence. But silence, as every elder knows, is not peace. It is the absence of power. That's why what happened next wasn't just infrastructure. It was revolution. It's a question of sovereignty, the right to decide how, when, and with whom your people communicate. Without that, a nation can never truly stand on its own, no matter how many flags fly over its capital. History shifted in September 2022. The world called it a coup. But in the dusty streets of Ouagadougou, it felt like something else, a breath of air, long held. Captain Ibrahim Traoré, a soldier known more for silence than speeches, stepped forward, not with grand promises, but with a manifesto. He called it the Progressive and Popular Revolution. Its core principle, sovereignty not as a slogan but as a system. Traoré did not campaign. He commanded. Within weeks, he laid out an agenda that reached deeper than politics. It was a return to the vision once carried by Thomas Sankara, a Burkina Faso that owned itself from its crops to its code. But visions mean little without action. So in March 2024, Captain Ibrahim Traoré signed an executive decree that sent tremors through boardrooms from Paris to Silicon Valley. Burkina Faso would build a sovereign telecommunications network from the ground up. No foreign blueprints, no borrowed systems, no corporate middlemen. The mission, audacious. Some said impossible. Lay 200 kilometers of fiber-optic cable across the Sahel's unforgiving terrain, deserts, floodplains, rocky highlands. Construct 65 satellite ground stations, not shipped from Europe, but built in Ouagadougou and Bobo Dioulasso workshops. Erect 211 steel relay towers engineered to endure blistering heat and monsoon downpours. It would be one of the largest telecommunications overhauls on the African continent. The cost? $1.2 billion. The question from critics came quickly. Where would a landlocked nation under sanctions find that kind of money? Traoré's answer was simple and seismic. First, he ordered a complete audit of the national budget. Out went the quiet, unaccounted-for millions spent maintaining foreign military bases, bases that brought no peace and served no Burkinabè interest. That money was redirected into cable buried deep beneath Sahel's sand. Out went security contracts written in French that paid for arms pointed inward, not outward. Then came the gold. For decades, Burkina Faso had watched its mineral wealth hauled away in trucks, in tankers, in endless caravans of profit. On Africa's mineral map, Burkina Faso is a prime prize in the eyes of world powers: gold, manganese, uranium, fertile farmland, and a labor force well suited to resource extraction, where wages are always inversely proportional to the effort required. But leave the capital and travel to the provinces, and you'll still find children studying under roofs, pieced together from old sacks, mothers cooking thin porridge in place of rice, and old men plowing fields with bare hands. Western media calls this a resource-poor country. They show charts and indexes, then conclude it's due to poor governance, low education, harsh climate, all perfectly convincing reasons. But they never say that they themselves have played the role of managers for decades. They were the ones drafting and signing lucrative mining contracts that sent 90% of the profits straight into their own pockets. They dug out the minerals and carried them away, only to return and sell machinery, fertilizer, and clean water back to the very land that birthed those resources at inflated prices. A double game, a cruel paradox, a blatant injustice heavy on the backs of those too weak to resist. Burkina Faso became the richest land for others and the poorest for its own people. Ibrahim Traoré once visited a village in the north where residents lived right next to a gold mine but had no electricity to run a fan. He asked a child studying by candlelight, "Do you know what's under your feet?" The child replied, "It's the thing the white men come to take and then leave." No one had taught that child to say this, but all his life he had watched trucks loaded with gold pass by daily, while his father traveled tens of kilometers to dig a dry well and ration every drop of drinking water. This is not just material poverty. It is dispossession carried out across generations, a kind of poverty not born of barren land, but of being stripped of the right to own one's own soil. Then there is Traoré, a young journalist of 29, son of a market vegetable seller in Ouagadougou. He studied journalism in France, but chose to return home unwilling to write about Burkina Faso in the language of others. In one article, he didn't use ornate or scathing language. He simply described the lavish feasts foreigners held on Burkinabè, soil feasts prepared by local hands with the country's gold, land, and sweat. But when the eating began, every seat at the table bore a foreign name. The locals were only invited to watch or queue for leftovers. His final sentence left many readers silent. "No one forbids us from cooking. It's just that we've grown too used to asking for someone else's plate." Perhaps it was divine mercy, a miracle, that this article reached Ibrahim Traoré at a decisive moment, striking like a knock on a door that had been shut for far too long. His heart grew stronger than ever before. Under contracts signed behind closed doors, 90% of earnings left the country before the dust even settled. Traoré tore up those contracts. He renegotiated extraction terms. He demanded national stakes. And for the first time in a generation, gold stayed home not as bars in vaults, but as wires in the ground. Every bullet not fired became bandwidth. Every dollar not spent on surveillance was spent on signal. The international press scoffed. How could Burkina Faso, not even in Africa's top 10 economies, do what G20 nations still debate in theory? But Traoré was not playing by their rules. He was building new ones. By the end of 2023, a dedicated national fund had emerged, the Telecommunications Sovereignty Fund. No World Bank consultants, no IMF strings, just Burkinabè planners, engineers, and auditors working together to turn sovereignty into signal. This was not aid. This was recovery. A recovery of dignity, of decision-making, of the fundamental right to communicate without asking permission. Captain Ibrahim's latest news did not come from a podium. It rises from beneath the earth, traveling through cables and satellites suspended in the sky. And it traveled faster than any news cycle. Burkina Faso was step by step finding its own voice. It was a signal to the world that a landlocked African nation can claim the right to its own future without asking anyone's permission. If you believe that Faso Telecom and Ibrahim Traoré are God's gift to Africa, type God bless Africa. In a world where headlines still insist that Africa lacks expertise, Burkina Faso answered not with arguments, but with action. Faso Telecom was not imported. It was built end-to-end by Burkinabè minds and Burkinabè hands. 647 engineers, scientists, and technicians, 83% under the age of 35, trained not in Paris or Beijing, but in Ouagadougou. Many came from modest families, daughters of farmers, sons of market vendors. They studied by candlelight, commuted miles on dusty roads, and still rose to design a system rivaling global giants. Their alma mater, FasoTech Academy, a school born just 16 months before construction began. It wasn't part of any international ranking, but it had what the moment demanded: urgency, patriotism, and a mission too sacred to fail. From their keyboards in Koudougou and Ouagadougou, they did what foreign experts claimed could not be done. They wrote operating systems not in Silicon Valley's code, but in languages shaped by the Sahel, optimized for red dust storms, extreme heat waves, and sudden electrical surges. Their algorithms factored in Burkina Faso's own satellite data land cover, dust density, atmospheric humidity. Every line of logic was tested not in theory, but against the land itself. When storms rose over the Sahara, the system adapted, rerouting signal paths in milliseconds. When heat waves strained the network, cooling systems activated in synchrony, preserving uptime. These weren't features borrowed from the West. They were born from the ground. Every eSIM distributed to the public was encoded with a proprietary algorithm developed by the National Cryptography Bureau and embedded directly into devices assembled inside Burkina Faso. Each card was secure, encrypted, untrackable by foreign servers. No Google backups, no iCloud reroutes, no overseas surveillance. Messages, calls, and data no longer needed to pass through Marseille or Frankfurt. They stayed within the red borders of Burkina Faso, where they belonged. And in that, sovereignty became more than a slogan. It became software. The backbone of Faso Telecom was a Tier 4 data center in Koudougou, constructed from locally forged steel and cooled with evaporative panels made in-country. It could handle over 2.5 million simultaneous connections. During its first stress test, a simulated cyber attack and blackout, it maintained 99.8% uptime. More than infrastructure, it was a shield. Security wasn't an afterthought. It was the very purpose. As one young engineer, barely 24, wrote on the whiteboard in FasoTech's main hall, "We build, we protect." The mobile network's management platform was modular, fully encrypted, and designed with data sovereignty in mind. No tiered access. No bronze, silver, or gold packages. A farmer in Goram had the same bandwidth rights as a teacher in the capital. Essential services, education, healthcare, agriculture received unlimited bandwidth by law. No one had to choose between a doctor's advice and a data bill. And when the public asked how it all worked, Traoré didn't deliver a long speech. He simply said, "Our voice will no longer have to pass through another continent before it reaches our neighbor. From now on, we speak from here, and it echoes everywhere here." Captain Ibrahim's latest news didn't travel through press conferences. It traveled in signal bars, 5 strong, for the first time in villages long forgotten. What some called a miracle was in truth a declaration. A nation once silenced had built its own microphone, and this time no foreign hand could mute it. This is not just control over technology. This is the right to decide the future, who stores the data, who routes the information, who holds the switch. Would it have happened without President Ibrahim Traoré? Type thank you to honor and acknowledge President Traoré and his partners for making Faso Telecom a reality. When Faso Telecom went live, the change wasn't just visible in signal strength, it was felt in the rhythm of daily life. In the Sahel highlands, where classrooms once echoed with silence, children now learn from teachers hundreds of miles away. The lessons arrive clear, uninterrupted in Mure Fulfulde Diula languages once absent from the digital world. No need for costly data packages. No need to wait for paper textbooks. In just 8 months, rural student participation in online learning rose over 40%. In the northern town of Djibo, mothers no longer travel hours to reach a clinic. Through Faso Health Grid, they consult pediatricians in Bobo Dioulasso from home. It's not just a phone call, it's an encrypted peer-to-peer connection. Their voices no longer bounce through Marseille or Geneva. They stay home protected, private, trusted. And in hospitals where outages once endangered lives, patient records now rest safely in Koudougu's servers, beyond the reach of foreign shutdowns. The fields tell their own story. Over 130,000 farmers receive real-time forecasts through Faso FarmerNet. Rainfall predictions, soil alerts, crop recommendations all delivered within 8 seconds. What once took a week to spread by word of mouth now takes less than a breath. And for the first time, the language of progress matches the rhythm of the land. Burkina Faso latest news isn't broadcast from foreign media anymore. It's lived in the homes of rural nurses, market sellers, border guards. The so-called silent sacrifices have become visible, connected, heard. In impoverished rural areas, planned housing for those displaced by terror network coverage has replaced despair. Families once crammed into tents now have addresses, doors, and Wi-Fi. Their children attend virtual school. Their voices travel not in echoes, but in clarity. And in all this, something deeper has returned. Trust, not in slogans, not in aid, but in the idea that a nation can serve its people, not exploit them. This network does more than connect devices. It reconnects people to each other and to a government that once seemed distant, aloof, unreachable. For the African diaspora, the reaction is even more deeply personal. In churches and community halls in Atlanta, Detroit, and Houston, people don't just see a telecommunications victory. They see a metaphor for self-determination. It's the same pride as when a neighborhood builds its own school, or when a historically black college earns accreditation without outside validation. That's the exact feeling Faso Telecom evokes. In a border village, a young teacher said, "I used to tell my students we were waiting. Now I tell them we've begun." Every time a signal bar lights up, so does a sense of ownership. Because this isn't connectivity handed down, it's sovereignty built up. A child learning multiplication tables in Mure, a mother tracking her prenatal health without leaving her compound, a farmer adjusting his planting schedule based on satellite-fed alerts. These are not conveniences. They are answers to generational silence. They are repairs to broken promises. And they are reminders that dignity begins not in speeches, but in signal. Because this isn't charity, it's justice. This isn't aid. It's what was always owed. And Burkina Faso, against all odds, is collecting that debt not in bitterness, but in bandwidth. The sharp pushback from global powers was expected, but the quiet admiration from African observers was the real surprise. And maybe that's the truest story here. For decades, nations were told that without permission, they could build nothing. Burkina Faso has just proven the opposite. If you agree, say it out loud. Which country do you think will be next? The moment Faso Telecom went live, it sent tremors far beyond Burkina Faso's borders. Just hours after launch, Telréak's stock price in Paris plunged. Weeks later, Helionet Group, a Luxembourg-based telecom conglomerate controlling undersea cable infrastructure, filed a $276 million claim accusing Burkina Faso of economic sabotage and contractual breaches. The Ministry of Justice replied with only one sentence: "We do not negotiate the return of what already belongs to us." In the West, the outcry was swift and sharp. The Guardian warned of telecom consolidation by authoritarian means. CNN Africa speculated that Faso Telecom might be weaponized against dissent. The Economist asked, can Burkina Faso be trusted with its own data? But inside Africa, the tone was altogether different. In Dakar, radio DJs called it the first diplomatic firewall. In Nairobi, editorial boards debated whether Kenya could replicate the model. In Ghana's parliament opposition, MPs stood up and asked, if they can do it, why can't we? And across the African diaspora, from church basements in Detroit to barbershops in Atlanta, the story of Faso Telecom struck like a tuning fork in the chest. Burkina Faso has just turned 1.2 billion into a sharp rebuttal to the notion that Africa can't compete not with conferences or aid, but with fiber optic satellites, and 647 people rewriting their own future. Faso Telecom is not just a telecommunications project, it is a declaration of sovereignty, a blueprint for any nation daring to break free from the framework built by others. When Captain Ibrahim Traoré said connectivity is no longer a service, it is a birthright, he was speaking to the entire world. This message has inspired and deeply moved the hearts of African people. Ibrahim Traoré's actions proved that the chains of the past can be broken not only in parliaments or courtrooms, but also in server rooms and in the trenches where fiber optic cables are laid. For the African diaspora, the message is equally clear: ownership is essential. Whether it is the land you stand on, the school your child attends, or the cable that carries your voice, ownership is always the first step toward dignity. The same pride felt when a black college earns accreditation without white gatekeepers. The same joy when a neighborhood builds its own clinic or launches its own radio station. That pride of self-made, self-owned, self-protected progress is what Faso Telecom represents. For the first time in living memory, the signal wasn't just a technological asset. It was a political stance, and its message was unmistakable: Africa will no longer wait for permission. Burkina Faso latest news didn't come from aid conferences or World Bank forums. It came from dust-covered relay towers forged in-country, linking 92% of the population to a network that asked nothing of foreign consultants. The impact went viral. IT students in Kinshasa rewrote their theses to study Faso Telecom's structure. Legislators in Malawi and Sierra Leone began drafting data sovereignty laws modeled on Burkina Faso's protocols. Talks began to open a signal corridor between Burkina Faso, Niger, and Mali. The 20th century brought flags of independence, but not always the means to turn that independence into reality. That is why Faso Telecom is a matter of survival. History shows that revolutions often begin in the streets, with banners, strikes, or marches. But this is a revolution in an invisible space where signals travel at the speed of light. No gunfire, no barricades, just a single switch flipped in August 2025, changing the balance of power. And if this is the $1.2 billion secret they didn't want you to know, now you know. The question is, will you let it stop here, or will you let it spread? If this story stirs something in you, don't just scroll past. Like, share, speak up, subscribe, because they've hidden our history for far too long. Let's speak loudly about the future. If you are proud to know someone who wrote the code, soldered the wires, or flipped the switch for Faso Telecom, send this to your family, friends, and community. May God bless them. Don't stay silent. Let everyone hear it, remember it, and rise with it. Because Africa is not just catching up, we are building our own networks from the smallest actions on our own terms.